London, I'm Matt Brown, and you're listening to the Matt Brown Podcast. If you've listened before, you'll know that this show is about all things local and maybe some other stuff too. Today's episode is a nice combination of both. Late last month, Prime Minister Carney and Premier Ford launched a multi-billion-dollar housing affordability program that's likely to have a significant positive impact on the housing market right across the country. Today, Mike Moffatt and Jared Zaifman are joining us to take a deep dive into the details of the plan. I'm going to tell you all about it right after this.
Discover London Bicycle Cafe. It's the perfect time of year to take a break on their spacious patio, featuring craft beer, espresso drinks, snacks, meals, and more. London Bicycle Cafe at the Forks of the Thames. See you soon.
And we're back. The program the Prime Minister and the Premier launched is called the Canada-Ontario Partnership to Build. And it's big. It's an $8.8 billion initiative designed to accelerate housing construction here in London and right across the province and the country. Dr. Mike Moffatt holds a Ph.D. in Management Science from Ivey Business School here in London and an M.A. in Economics from the University of Rochester. He's worked with politicians and policymakers of all political stripes in several countries to craft more effective public policy. He's the founder of the University of Ottawa's Missing Middle Initiative, MMI, and the co-host of the Missing Middle podcast. Also joining us today is Jared Zaifman. He's the CEO at the London Home Builders Association, and he's a former member of London City Council. Over the past several months, Jared has taken many trips to Toronto and Ottawa with provincial and federal Home Builder Association colleagues to meet with government officials and to lobby for the policy changes that we'll be talking about today. And that's the backstory. They're here to tell us all about it. So let's go. Mike, Jared, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah, listen, it's great for you both to be here. First up, big picture. Mike, can you give us some context here? We hear the term housing affordability crisis. In a nutshell, what is this affordability crisis? How big is it? Who's it affecting the most across Ontario and across Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for letting us be here today. When we look at the housing crisis or the affordability crisis, it's almost like a series of crises or a chain of crises that, on the one end, we look at homelessness and those at risk of falling into homelessness. We look at low income renters and the challenges that they're having. Most of the work that we do on the missing middle is more focused on the challenges that middle class folks are having, particularly young middle class folks. And that's both on the rental side, that rents have increased faster than incomes for most of the last 20 to 25 years. And on the ownership side, so back in 2004, when I bought my first home, brand new home in the kind of Adelaide and Sunningdale area, my wife and I, we were in our late 20s, and we paid about 3 times our income. And that was standard. And that had actually been standard for generations. That was the old kind of rule that, try not to go above that. Nowadays, when we look at the data, that if you are a young couple in your late 20s or early 30s wanting an entry level but family size home, maybe a 3-bedroom townhome or something like that, you're now looking at 6, 7, 8 times income. And that's not just in the London area, but that's kind of across southern Ontario, and we see it in other parts of Canada. So really, that's the focus of our work on the missing middle, looking at both the rental side and the fact that, the opportunities that my wife and I had 20, 25 years ago are different than the ones our kids are going to have, where, we could afford to buy a family-sized home for 3 times income. And you certainly can't do that anymore. And once you get into that 7X, 8X, 9X, you're not even qualifying for a mortgage at that point.
Yeah, no, it's really remarkable and in some ways unbelievable. I think back to the first house that I bought. It was just before you and your wife. The asking price for the duplex on Old Springbank was $129,000. And I thought, my gosh, how am I going to pay that? I negotiated them down to $127,500. And that seemed like a whole lot of money. My grandfather used to say to me, you never want to spend more than 6 months of your annual income on a vehicle, and his number was more than 2.5 times, 3 times your annual income on a home. And that was actually achievable. The second home that I purchased was around the same time as you. I think it was $212,000. And I thought that was a moonshot at the time. So I can't imagine how people are feeling. Jared, I did notice your Gmail account has a number 86 in the address. And I don't want to pin you down to anything, but I think maybe it's a little bit different for people from your cohort than from Mike's and mine.
It certainly is. I mean, depending on if and when you were able to get into the housing market, things could be very different, right? So, fortunately, a number of folks in my age generation, had been able to purchase their first home maybe within the last decade. Some were able to, some maybe not. And unfortunately, we're finding a situation where, the first time home buyer, the average age has now shifted from 30 years old to 40 years old.
40.
Um, to 40. And, so certainly people my age, some still haven't had the ability or opportunity to purchase their first home. So it's become very challenging for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's actually dig a little bit deeper there. Jared, we heard the big picture from Mike, and let's zoom in on London. This show is about all things local and maybe some other stuff too. And so, how does what Mike's been saying here and has been saying regularly in the media, how does this stack up against what you're seeing here in London and area?
I mean, what Mike has been saying and evidence from the missing middle has been really helpful. And certainly Mike's perspective on London and having been here is helpful. From the Home Builder Association, we certainly see that that evidence is here. Essentially almost sort of post COVID. We saw the prices of homes in London really, really spike. In part, we saw a huge migration out from the GTA. And I think, Mike was a big driver of this, but the drive until you qualify notion.
Yeah.
And so people would come down the highway and try and find a place where they could afford. We're still seeing that, and in part because the prices were so inflated in the greater Toronto Hamilton area. And unfortunately, as a result of that, in large part, we've seen communities farther and farther away have prices inflate as well. And so over the last number of years, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, at that certain point in time, we saw prices here almost double, essentially almost overnight. Those prices really haven't come down substantially since that point. And, we've also seen land prices escalate. Cost for development charges for new infrastructure in London has gone up tremendously in the last decade. Taxes have gone up, and so again, even just from an HST perspective, which maybe we'll chat a little bit more later, but just as the value of houses have gone up, the HST value has gone up tremendously as a result of that as well.
Yeah, of course, it's a closed system. If one number goes up, the other one goes up. We will touch on development charges, and we will touch on the HST rebate and some other things moving forward. You always have to function within the environment that you find yourselves. And we've been dealt some pretty big surprises here in London, across Canada, and around the world over the past 14 months or so. London received some pretty unfortunate news this month, a 9.1% joblessness rate. And I wonder, does this compound the problem, Jared?
It absolutely does. I mean, this is something we started really ringing the alarm bell on sort of earlier in March. We had surveyed our members just to get a better sense of exactly how sort of dire things were because, we had been hearing anecdotally from many of them that they were really challenged. I mean, we saw in 2024 and 2025, single family homes had really dropped off in London, which had been sort of the bread and butter, what many of our builders had built over the last number of decades, to the point where in 2025, it only composed 15% of what has been constructed in the city of London as far as housing types. Where the majority of the construction in London really shifted to purpose-built rental and apartments. And we saw a lot of incentivization from federal and provincial governments in that direction, trying to meet certain aspects, whether, from population growth, from immigration. And, now there's obviously been a bit of a shift in that, but those incentives certainly were there and made sense for a lot of our builders to shift in that direction. At the same time, it sort of limited, who could participate really in those programs. Unfortunately, to the detriment of many of our smaller to medium-sized builders who, sadly, many of them have had to lay off family members, employees they've had for many, many years as a result of some of these difficult times. And, to the point where I think it was through the majority last 7 months of 2025, there was a loss of 5,800 construction jobs in the city of London.
Wow, that's huge. Mike, anything to add?
Yeah. Yeah, and we see that across the province, unfortunately, the job loss is somewhat lagging in the sense that the pre-construction sales go away first, but the workers are still, as Jared knows, they're still working on completing what's already been sold. So we see oftentimes. I'll get asked by policymakers saying, well, you keep saying things are really bad, but, we're not seeing massive job loss yet. But it takes time. It's a slow moving motion. And the people who tend to lose their job first aren't necessarily the tradespeople, but it's a lot of the kind of front office staff. Like you think of all the people who are working in those condo showrooms in Toronto, like once the bottom came out of the condo market, they were the first ones laid off. So, we've got, as Jared mentions, the 5,800 folks in the construction sector, but there's a lot of spin-off activity from that, not just the front office folks, but, all the, manufacturers who are making doors and windows and that kind of thing. So it kind of permeates across the economy. And it really kind of affects the manufacturing sector as well at a time where the manufacturing sector can't really afford that job loss when there's, so much problems between Canada and the US right now and trade because of the Trump tariffs.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Mike, I'm a bit of a geography nerd. That was my degree at University of Waterloo, and Boom Bust Echo was a favorite book of mine. And Jared's talking about single family homes and only 15% being built. And when I was reading that book, basically our suburbs were supposed to be wastelands, vast wastelands of abandoned houses because everyone was going to want to move downtown and move out of the suburbs. And I think that they got that one pretty wrong.
Yeah, they did. And if I want to be generous to them, perhaps maybe they were just early, but there was this idea that older people would kind of downsize from their existing suburban homes and move into something smaller, and that would free up homes for the next generation. But it largely didn't happen, and instead we had this move towards aging in place. I think of my dad out in Oak Ridge. I think he's threatened to move out every year for the last 25 years, but he never does so because when he looks around and goes, like, and anything's just kind of a lateral move. Like I want to stay in Oak Ridge. I want to see my friends, when I'm out walking the dog or wherever. I don't want to go and move downtown. That's not for me. But any other home I'm going to buy in Oak Ridge is about the same size as the one I already have. So what's the point? So we do have this kind of blockage in the system. We do have seniors living longer, healthier lives, and that's a fantastic thing. But it does mean that these assumptions that we made that all of these suburban homes were going to free up simply didn't happen.
Yeah, and listen, Oak Ridge is a beautiful place. Just don't bring your dad a sidewalk or a street light, and he'll probably be happy forever. Mike, you've done a ton of work on housing affordability. You've talked about it a lot on your podcast, The Missing Middle. Prime Minister Carney and Premier Ford recently made an announcement about an agreement to try to make new builds more affordable, specifically around waiving the HST, reducing DC charges, and that's a development charge. Jared, I'm going to ask you to talk about what that is specifically in a minute. But can you touch on the big picture here, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're seeing across the province is that resale home prices have gone down quite a bit because of a lack of demand or whatever. But the cost of home building basically hasn't. So when we look at what's happening in the sales market, new homes are having a really tough time competing with resale. Like if you want to go out and buy a home, you're going to go buy resale. So what these moves do is they cut the cost of construction. And we've estimated, we had an example on the website where we look at, like, if you wanted to build a 3-bedroom townhome, like entry-level townhome in Oshawa, before these changes, you're probably looking at about $730,000 for construction materials and kind of a minimal viable profit to allow a lender to lend you money to do construction financing. And you can't really sell new units at that price point because there's just way too much inventory out there, resale inventory at about the 650 range. But we estimate that the combination of these two moves, it's going to lower construction costs by about 16 to 17%. You're going to those developers are now going to be able to put units on the market in the 610 to 620 range. and they're going to be able to compete with those $650,000 resale units. So what this means cheaper homes for families, but it also just means more homes are going to be constructed because the biggest competition new home builders have is oftentimes not each other. It's that they're competing with the resale market. And now we're able to get those construction costs down. You're going to be able to make new home more cost competitive versus resale.
Yeah. I think back to 2004 when I bought that house for $212,000. I got to say, I was pretty naive, kind of young, and I was surprised to see that there was GST being charged. It does make a big difference. Jared, I want to drill down a bit into what a development charge is. And I've heard you speak about this on a regular basis and how that can affect the local market. Obviously, that can translate across the province, and also how it's escalated over the past little while.
Yeah, I mean, so development charge, let's say on a basic understanding, really is funds that are required by the municipality to pay for infrastructure, ostensibly for growth, or what they would say typically for new infrastructure that would be tied to new subdivisions or new communities, with the sort of old saying going that, growth is supposed to pay for growth. However, at the same time, we have really seen over the last number of years, decade or so, that development charges and what it has been used for, the usage of it has certainly expanded. And I think you're sort of seeing arguments where, what is actually being contributed strictly for new communities and new infrastructure versus what is their benefits for existing communities and existing residents within the city, wherever that might be. So on a typical new home, you would see that development charge typically get passed along to the consumer or to the new homeowner because it's just simply not a cost that builders can just eat. And so in the City of London, for example, that will range right now from approximately $20,000 to $50,000. So $20,000 per unit for an apartment, up to around $50,000 for a single family home. But again, this can be wildly different across the province, where, there's been really, the City of London has done a decent job with their reserve funds and trying to ensure those are kept healthy fashion and they're spending that wisely, where we've seen some other municipalities that really aren't doing that. And we've seen the provincial government start to step in and have some issues in those areas where, more in the GTA and seeing, especially because those development charges are over $100,000 in some cases.
Yeah. And so, we look at development charges and we used to say in the old days that, you think about the roads and the sewers and the water and the wastewater, a little bit for parks, a little bit for library capital, but there's been a bit of a development charge creep, I think, that's been occurring at various levels in communities across Ontario. And obviously that is passed along to the buyer, which leads me to my next question. And Mike, he touched on this as well. And that is that London builders, they're sitting on some inventory. Some homes were built. Projections probably were that they would have been long sold by now. And that's got to create some real ripples in the system and some real problems for your home builders as well.
Yeah, we surveyed our members, and we actually had some of our members who had built their last house back in 2023. So some that have been sitting there for a few years now, and looking at around a couple hundred homes in inventory, which is quite substantial. And it's challenging because, again, from a jobs perspective, from an investment perspective, when our builders have homes that they're sitting on, they're carrying costs for carrying those homes and all the costs they've invested into that. And they are not able to reinvest that capital back into the community. So it could be people no longer employed. It could be money that could be invested with new housing getting started. And again, we're finding between some of the uncertainty that's existed because of trade challenges with the United States and job concerns, we know that there are so many people that still want and need homes. But part of the issue is just that uncertainty piece. And so with some of these changes, when it comes to HST and development charges, if there's opportunity for some of those costs to come down, it could mean that a lot of those inventory homes could get moved off the market and the ability for our builders to start reinvesting back in the community.
Yeah, and not to mention that when a new home is purchased, it brings, the last number I heard was about $50,000, $60,000 of investment and spending to a local economy. Mike, you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I was just going to say a lot of the same things that Jared said. That yeah, but it's like any business, like if you manufacture a retailer and you've got a bunch of inventory piling up in the back, you're going to say like, hey, let's stop making more. And same thing if a developer goes to the bank for construction financing and say, hey, I got a great idea for a new project. They're going to say, well, why don't you sell those other 37 units out there first before you start building new ones? So and the HST move in particular, I think, is going to help move some of that inventory because now you can basically cut the cost of that the after-tax cost of that inventory by 13%. Get some folks in the showroom, get some of those houses sold, and then you can start building again.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking upwards of $130,000. I think you said that's really significant. So, Jared, from your perspective here in London, this is going to make a difference, even though it's a temporary. I believe it's April 1st, 2026 to April 1st, 2027 program.
Yeah, so a 1 year program, which, I would say depending who you ask, but from a lot of our builders' perspectives would say, this might be actually the best way to try and get people off the sidelines and buying a house because this is literally going to be the next year is the best time to be able to buy a new home. And with that kind of cash on the table from other levels of government can make a huge, huge difference. And we've already seen it just in the last 2 weeks since this has really rolled out with our builders, sales centers and model homes. The amount of traffic that is going through those is unbelievable as compared to where it's been. And we've seen also some deals start to get signed. So things are really starting to move, and it's making a difference. Which this is something our provincial, our national, our local association has been advocating for. I know Mike has been certainly pushing on this that this is going to be a way to actually make a difference when it comes to housing in the province, and we really think it will. And I just Matt, back to your point before, but I think the Real Estate Association had the number pegged at $124,000 in spin-off revenue for every home sold in London specifically. So it could be quite substantial.
Okay, so twice my number. That makes sense because I've been out of the game for about 10 years. Mike, you've been around, I don't want to say for a really long time, but you've been around for a while. You've been working with different levels of government over that time, and you know that no policy is perfect. So when a government gets involved, there can be some unintended or unanticipated consequences. What's on your radar here? What should people be watching for? Because this can't be perfection.
No, it certainly can't be. So I think on the HST piece, I actually think the kind of unintended consequences are, if anything, kind of positive. As Jared points out, that 1 year timeline actually does create a bunch of kind of fear of missing out. And, nothing prevents the government from doing this again next year if they think it's working. But, I actually think that uncertainty is helpful here. On the development charge side, my, I guess, concern, if I do have one, I love what governments are doing here, but ultimately, this is just kind of transferring money from the provincial and federal government to the municipal government. We're not really creating any kind of transformative change when it comes to the development charge system. What we have done is kind of buy ourselves 3 years because that's how long this program lasts. So my hope is that governments actually use that 3 years to develop better ways of paying for infrastructure. So we know the Ford government is looking at changes to how water and wastewater are done in the province, going to a municipal service corporation model like they have in Edmonton, which can save a lot of money on interest charges. So I think if there is an unintended consequence here, that it might be that we kind of waste that 3 years and kind of go, okay, problem solved. And then, we find ourselves in 2029 going, okay, now that development charge billions are gone, but we haven't actually solved the core problem. So I think that is the biggest risk here.
Okay, Mike, is this what you mean by not letting municipalities off the hook, or did you mean something else when you wrote that?
Well, I think we need, again, more kind of transformative change here. That we've got kind of 3 years for this to change the system, and I'm worried that we're not going to use it, and we're going to get a false sense of security. And instead, we need, I think, all levels of government, but particularly the province and municipality, to go, okay, how can we fund this infrastructure and not throw everything into development charges? Because there's a pretty egregious example. Like for instance, City of Kitchener, they're building a soccer facility that's over $100 million, and outside of some federal grants, like 100% of that is going on to development charges. And this is a facility that, existing residents and new residents will use alike, but we're imposing all of that cost onto new homes and onto new residents, which raises the cost of home building. So I think we need to see, municipalities act a little bit more responsibly, but I think we also need to see the province, kind of crack down and change the rules and say, okay, these are, the things that development charges should be paying for, and that's fine. And that these other things that are nice to have probably aren't appropriate for DC. So let's, take that off the option list.
Okay, and maybe here in London, how can we think about ourselves as a region, not just a community with really defined urban growth boundaries? A perfect example, I would say that Arva, uses some of our wastewater facilities here in London, and there can be all kinds of arguments for and against. But really, I mean, if growth is happening there, that's right beside the city. It's still largely an inward and upward, but it's just a more efficient use of these DC dollars and taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where the municipal service corporations can come in handy, right? Because now that wastewater is no longer the responsibility of the City of London, but rather, essentially what's a crown corporation that can operate in multiple municipalities and, assess those charges fairly. But that is an issue. And we see that across the province where you have all of these kind of smaller communities. So I'm in Ottawa right now. And, we have out in Lanark County, so places like Carleton Place and Perth, their development charges are quite low because a lot of the infrastructure that those residents use aren't actually paid for by those councils. They're paid for by the city of Ottawa because it's, a lot of government employees and government relations people who drive into the city every day, use those arterial roads and so on. So, there is a certain level of piggybacking that goes on and a little bit of free riding. So, I do think we need to look at how we can fund this infrastructure better at a regional level, because otherwise you can get this disconnect where, the City of London is paying for the infrastructure and, the good people in Wayland Corners are using it, but not having to actually fund any of the both the building of it or the upkeep.
Okay, well, listen, we're just about out of our time together. And before we get talking about ring roads and things like that, I think that I should cut things just a little bit short, but I do want to give each of you a last word. And I'm going to start with you, Jared.
I would say that, we talk a lot about important points today, but certainly between HST, development charge reductions, I mean, really the next year will be probably with certainty for sure that the next year will be the best time to buy a new home. There's lots of different pieces of uncertainty out there, but this is going to be the best time. I would say, don't wait for people that are thinking about this. Don't wait on potential development charge reductions. I think we're still some time away from seeing what that looks like. But with HST, that was in effect April 1st. And so, get moving on that. And our builders are raring to go. They've looked at dropping their prices. So I'd say take a look out there to see what that looks like. And I think to, Mike's point, there really needs to be a new relationship, a new foundation started on development charges and how infrastructure is funded. That's been the case in Ontario for 40 years, but this isn't the way it works in every province. It works different even with our neighbors down south. And so there's different opportunities and different ways that we can explore this. And I think we've gotten to a point now where what's worked before hasn't, and we need to start shifting directions.
Okay, thanks. Mike?
Yeah, well, I would say that, policy nerds like me like to nitpick a lot of things and kind of get lost in minutia. But, I will say, like, one of the challenges we have in Canada is that, we have 3 or 4 orders of government who, can often engage in, passing the buck and things like that. And I am heartened to see, the province and the federal government work together, 2 different partisan stripes, but come together, recognize a problem, and, come up with some real solutions. So, yeah, I would give both Prime Minister Carney and Premier Ford credit for this. They worked well together. They identified a problem, and nerds like me can kind of nitpick, what's on footnote 7. But just the fact that they're working together, trying to solve a problem, I think is a fantastic thing for this country.
Okay, well, listen, time flies and we're out of it. We're going to have to leave it there. Jared, it's been great to have you back on the podcast, and Mike, that was a great first go as well. You're welcome back anytime. Thanks again to both of you for joining today.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And I'll be back with more to close out the show right after this.
Discover London Bicycle Cafe, home of family cargo and urban cycling. Test ride an e-bike along riverside trails to see how easy moving through our city can really be. London Bicycle Cafe at the Forks of the Thames. See you soon.
Okay, that's the show. As always, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you know a little bit more about our national housing crisis and, more importantly, what our provincial and federal governments are doing about it than you did before you tuned in. Thanks to Jared and Mike for joining us today, and thank you for joining us too. If you like what you're hearing on this podcast, I can pretty much guarantee that you're going to enjoy the show that Mike co-hosts. It's called The Missing Middle Podcast. It is really easy to find. Would you like to pitch an episode? Or would you like to tell me about what you thought of this one or a previous episode? Please visit the show's website or drop me a line at themattbrownpodcast@gmail.com. And thanks to everyone who's already doing so too. It's great to get your feedback, and I'm enjoying the back and forth. So with that, that's the show. I'm Matt Brown, and you've been listening to the Matt Brown Podcast. It's the show about all things London and maybe some other stuff too. Thanks for listening. Bye for now, and talk to you again soon, London.